Welcome to another after school healthcare science sessions. We're really lucky to be joined by Artie, who is a trainee clinical scientist, and Jade, who is a clinical scientist within neurophysiology. And they're going to explain a bit more about their field and how to get into it. So a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We've kept your cameras and microphones off because the webinar is going to be recorded and put on YouTube. If you do have any questions for either Artie or Jade or myself, just pop them in the chat and then they'll respond. If you do want to use live captions, just follow the instructions on the page by clicking more to get live captions should you wish to use it. So I'll pass you over to Artie, who'll let us know a little bit more.
Hello, thank you, Kwemi. So yeah, like Kwemi said, just a little session to talk to you a bit more about neurophysiology. Just change the slide. Okay, so the main aim for today is just to give you a bit of background about what neurophysiology is as a kind of a career, and to learn slightly more about how to get into the career if you're interested. So just a very brief bit of background about what neurophysiology actually is. So it's the study of the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves, essentially. So looking at the nervous system, and what kind of our role as clinical scientists, trainee clinical scientists, or physiologists is to kind of investigate those kind of those systems and kind of the pathways by measuring the electrical signals. And what this allows us to do is to allows us to monitor and kind of help diagnose a range of different conditions. This can range from conditions like epilepsy, nerve injuries, sleep disorders, and kind of some other more known conditions like multiple sclerosis. We're a little niche field within kind of healthcare science, but it's important to kind of look at all the different healthcare science careers, because healthcare scientists work together, and we kind of work together to do around 80% of the diagnosis kind of within healthcare itself. So it's very important that we look at these things. And so a bit more about what we do kind of within neurophysiology. So like I said, our tests are mainly to look at monitor and diagnose different conditions. So we aid in the diagnosis, and we do that via a range of different tests that we'll touch upon slightly later on. We work as part of a larger team, so as part of kind of all other healthcare scientists, doctors, nurses, kind of within a hospital, there's kind of a great team behind kind of working towards just the one test. And we can work towards research and development as well, so there's always new things to learn and kind of help better services. And we work in hospitals, so we can work in a range of settings that can be kind of with outpatients, so that's just when people come to attend a scheduled appointment. Or we can go to the wards as well. So we often go to places like ICU, and often kind of as you further specialise and kind of progress within your career, you might kind of opt to do some further testing in kind of operation theatres, and working kind of with surgeons. So we do a range of testing, and a lot of the tests are probably things you may not have heard about before, which is okay. Like I said, we're quite niche. So one of the main tests we do is something known as an EEG, which is an electroencephalogram. This is just a study of the brain waves. I'll just briefly mention them all now, because we'll talk about them all in a bit more detail. But there's, as you can see on the mind map, there's kind of different types of the EEG itself. So whether, like I said, someone comes to attend the appointment, or whether we go to the ward to do it. And even within that, we can kind of change the test depending on what the question is. We also do a test called evoked potentials. That's, like I said, I'll explain it a bit more, but there's different types of evoked potentials we do. So one's looking kind of at the visual pathways, one the auditory, and one kind of the sensory pathways. And then we have nerve conduction studies and something called electromyography, which is also known as EMG. But that's just kind of a brief snapshot of a range of things that you could get involved with if you did decide that neurophysiology was something that you were interested in. So we'll start off with kind of one of the main tests we do, and kind of the bread and butter of neurophysiology, which is an EEG. And what this test is, the graphic isn't the best, but it's basically an example to show you that we stick lots of different buttons, so little electrodes, onto a patient's scalp, It says glued, they're not glued anymore. We use kind of a conductive paste to help record the signals. And once they're all attached to the patient's scalp, they record brainwaves. And there's quite a few we analyze. We tend to see in kind of an average EEG, you'd put about 23 of those electrodes on. So you'd get kind of a big snapshot of kind of what the patient's brain is doing kind of in the here and now. It's non-invasive, so it doesn't hurt the patient at all. And we often record it alongside a video recording in the appointment. And the main reason for that is just so we can see whether, if anything clinically was to happen, we can then kind of see whether it links to what the findings we're seeing on the brainwaves. We have slightly different variations between how we can perform this test. So we have something called a routine EEG, which is when we put all the leads on, we'll record for about 20 minutes. We'll get the patient to do a few exercises. So we'll get them to do a deep breathing exercise. And often we'll show them some flashing lights as well to test to see whether they're what's known as photosensitive. So just to make sure that they're safe with the bright lights and there's no kind of adverse side effects. And we'd also let them relax for a little bit so we can compare what their brain's doing in all these different states. To kind of build on that, if we needed more information after that test, we can invite them back for what's known as a sleep-deprived EEG, which is essentially the same as a routine EEG, but it also includes kind of an added period where we leave the patient to rest for a little bit longer and aim to get a little snapshot of sleep so we can see whether that gives us any more information. And then we have something called an ambulatory EEG, which is basically both of those tests combined, but rather than you staying in the hospital for the test for the duration, we can send you home. And you'd record at home and continue with kind of what you would normally do in the day, just for us to get kind of even more information and data for us to analyze to kind of get a better diagnostic picture. Linking on to that is the next part of the test, which is video telemetry. So that's just when you'd go home and you take a video camera so we can video at the same time to try and capture events that might be going on. And then an even kind of further specialism of that is intracranial EEG. So that's when electrodes would be placed invasively, so inside the skull, and that's normally used kind of a more surgery setting. So that's not what we do day to day, but that is something that the EEG can be used for. But the main reason for us to do an EEG is to help diagnose different conditions. So the main one that we tend to see is epilepsy. So we wanted to monitor kind of the brain activity to see if we can spot there's a specific area of the brain that might be affected, or to help kind of pinpoint or kind of help with medication and treatment. And also for different conditions, like if there's an infection or damage, or kind of in even more significant scenarios, kind of in the ICU, if we need to help kind of with prognosis of a case. The next test that we do, kind of, I'd say we do quite often is what we call nerve conduction study, which is NCS, and this is often kind of linked with electromyography. So the tests work together quite well, as a nerve conduction study is assessing kind of the health of your nerve. So it's looking at how fast your nerves are working. So the way we do that is, you can see it in the little image towards the right, it might not be the clearest. We put stickers on one end of the nerve, essentially, just all on kind of surface level. So we look at your hands and your feet, and sometimes even other body parts, but mainly those. We put stickers on one side of the nerve, and then we'd stimulate using kind of a small electrical pulse and signal on the other end. And then we just want to measure how quick that response was. So we look at how fast that was and kind of the size of it. And then we'd measure that to kind of help get a bit more information about different things. And what EMG does is it looks at the electrical activity inside the muscle itself. So not just the nerve, but the nerve that muscle might be supplying. So often that's why they're used together quite well to help look at conditions that could affect that. So an example of a common condition that we might see for this is something known as carpal tunnel syndrome. So that's when there might be an entrapment kind of in a nerve near your wrist, kind of in that area, which could cause some like pins and needles or weakness in your hand. So if we can help diagnose that, we can then help kind of treat those symptoms and prevent it getting any worse. And then another test that we do is evoked potentials. This I would say is kind of a mix of kind of the tests we've spoken about. So An evoked potential is looking at a very specific part of your nervous system. So the way it does that is they record from a specific stimulus. So we'd put kind of the leads, we'd put some leads on a patient's head, on their brain to look at different areas. So if it was kind of a visual evoked potential we're doing, we'd put some electrodes over the visual cortex, and we would produce a visual stimulus for the patient to look at. And we're looking at a specific derived response from that stimulus to see whether we can look at any kind of issues or isolate any kind of conditions along that pathway that might be damaged. It's the same for the other ones, but just obviously the stimulus we use is a bit different. So for an auditory one, we would give an auditory stimulus. So often the patient has some headphones on, can hear some different clicks, and we'd look at kind of the pathway and what we expect it to look like to make sure there's nothing bad going on there. And then the other one, there's two other ones, sorry. One is an SSEP, which is a somatosensory evoked potential. So that's looking at kind of the sensory pathways. So yeah, again, we put electrodes on that specific area of the brain, so kind of more kind of in the central kind of regions. And then we stimulate one of the peripheral nerves. So we might stimulate a nerve kind of on the hand and try and elicit kind of a twitch. And then we want to see how fast that that signal travels back to the brain, so we can kind of map the pathway and make sure there's no kind of lesions along that. And then one that works alongside that, and we often do, is something called a motor evoked potential, which very similar again, but just we're looking at kind of the motor pathways rather than the sensory. And the bottom are just kind of little examples of what they might look like. But yeah, again, they're done for a range of different conditions. One of the main ones that these ones are really good at helping to diagnose is multiple sclerosis. So that's when a patient can have lesions in different areas. So this can help us kind of identify whether there's kind of any silent lesions anywhere or anything kind of else going on, rather than just the symptoms they might be having. And then finally, we have something called interoperative monitoring. So this is when we can possibly work in theatres and kind of a surgical scenario. So this is a way for us to monitor the brain, the nerves, and the spinal cord during a surgery that a patient is having, to make sure that there's no damage caused to them and that they remain safe. So it uses a combination of the different tests that we just spoke about. And what our role would be is to perform those tests while the patient is having that surgery, so we can keep the surgeons informed to minimize risk, like I said. So we want to perform the test during and kind of as they're making any changes live as it's happening, so we can really kind of see if there is any changes and kind of how to avoid that happening, and if it does happen, how to kind of work backwards to minimize that. So like I said, we use a range of the tests we just spoke about. So it could be an EEG to look at the brain activity, could be an EMG to look at the muscle nerve conduction for the nerves, and evoked potentials to look at kind of a specific response from the spine. Most commonly, this is performed in surgeries involving the spine, the brain, or kind of if a tumor is being resected in any of these areas as well. But this is something that is kind of slightly more specialized. So as you kind of develop and build confidence in the rest of the tests, this is something you can opt to do, and it's quite exciting to be part of something quite live and kind of quite important. So that was just a brief kind of overview of what we do kind of day to day. So like I said, there's a range of different tests that we're involved in, and they can be kind of more direct kind of in the pathway, in the sense where a patient might come into hospital, you might perform those tests immediately to kind of help with their journey within the hospital, or it might be kind of a more long-standing condition that we're helping to monitor and treat. So to get into neurophysiology, there's a few different pathways. There is a degree apprenticeship that is it's quite a new thing that's kind of come across. But yeah, you could possibly kind of get an apprenticeship and you'd work in a hospital, gain the experience, and then you'd get a qualification along the same time. You could opt to go kind of an undergraduate route. So myself, I did something called the PTP, which was the practitioner training program. So it's a normal Bachelor of Science degree, but it's very placement heavy. So you'd apply for a UCAS to do all of that, but then you'd be placed in a hospital and you'd get kind of all that clinical experience and exposure as you go. So that's a really good option if possibly you prefer slightly a more structured route. Moving on from that, you can then even enter it at a different level. So if you did kind of any science degree and you weren't too sure what you wanted to specialize in, which is absolutely fine because it's a big decision to make, you could kind of opt to do a postgraduate. So you could do something called the Scientist Training Program, which is something that I'm doing now, which is known as the STP. So that's a work-based kind of supported course where you get a master's alongside, as well as kind of registration as a clinical scientist. It's similar to the PTP in the sense that it's still a 3-year course, even though it is kind of partnered alongside a master's. But you work day to day in a hospital, in a neurophysiology department, and you'd gain all of that experience and exposure. And then you have lots of different you have a portfolio to build to prove you're getting the clinical skills and kind of really show your development. And then you have Uniside to do alongside it. But the good point about that kind of option and that entry route is that, like I said, if you weren't too sure what you wanted to do and you didn't want to commit maybe when you're 18 years old or maybe even a little bit older, you could possibly revisit it as you're slightly older. And then furthering from that, there is this wouldn't be a pathway necessarily into neurophys. You would have to kind of already be within the field to what I'm aware, but you could do something known as the HSTT, which is the Higher Specialist Scientist Training Program. So Jade is on that program currently. So if you have any questions, I direct you more towards her side because she'll know a lot more about that than I will. But to my understanding, it's a 5-year program. Which is funded at a doctorate level kind of award. And it's the same thing where you'd kind of work and kind of get those qualifications alongside. I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but I think at the level you guys are at as well, that's probably something that's a bit later on down the line. So when looking at kind of why neurophys and why you might be interested in this and why this might be kind of a good career option for you, is firstly, like I said, we're really niche, so there's not that many of us at all. So there's really good kind of job security and opportunity here because we're really important in kind of what we do, in kind of the tests we're performing and the importance that they have. So you kind of you're needed in that sense, where like it's quite nicely protected, and it's really rewarding because of that, because where there's not many departments that perform such specialized tests, when patients have come from kind of all over the place, far and wide to come for a specific test that you're able to do and help them with in their kind of journey, it's a really, really rewarding thing to see that what you're doing is making a direct difference to someone. So like the examples on the words on the screen are just a few examples, but I genuinely think if you enjoy working with people and you really do want to try to make a difference to kind of to people directly, this would be a great option for you. It's also got a really great kind of link between technology. So you're not only kind of working directly with patients, you're having to work with a range of different machines and kind of new tech to kind of provide that direct care. So you're not just kind of, you get to learn lots of different things, not just the one, which I think is quite nice. It keeps it quite broad. And so not every day is the same, even though you might be performing the same tests, kind of the scenario you're performing them in might be a bit different. So there's lots of different problem solving things you might have to do. And like I said, we work as part of a massive team. So there's kind of a really wide MDT kind of feel about the whole role. So you really do get to work with kind of people from all different faces, which I personally think is quite lovely. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any about kind of why we picked neurophys or anything else like that. So when looking at kind of our kind of career trajectory and kind of how to progress and kind of a bit more kind of salary and kind of what we're like. So this visual is kind of a good example at kind of a basis. Just a caveat, the salaries I've put there, it does subject depend on kind of where you're based. So if you're in London, it might vary a bit more. There might be a bit of kind of London weighting to that, or kind of depending on where you are. And it is a range at the end of it. That is a typo there for this one. It should say 48 to 50, not 5. But it does have a range depending on kind of your experience and what you've done. But like I said, you'd start off. So if you do choose to go in kind of the undergraduate route, that is unpaid where it's an undergraduate, so you wouldn't be getting paid for your exposure there. But then once you qualify, you'd be at kind of that band 5 level. So you'd join as a physiologist at band 5, and you'd be expected to kind of perform some of the tests we spoke about, maybe not all of them, because you'd expect to kind of, as you become more specialized, to do those. Then as you do become a bit more specialized and you kind of further, you'd go up slightly, and then so on like that. If you came in at the STP route, so once you've already got an undergraduate, you'd be employed. So while you're doing that course, you are employed by the national school, and you're kind of in a trust in a host department. So you'd be paid a band 6 salary, which is probably you're looking at the more kind of specialized physiologist to specialized physiologist as clinical scientist. So alongside studying and working, you are getting a salary, which is really nice because it's really kind of getting you into that role and mindset of what it will be like once you do qualify into a clinical scientist. And then as you move forward, kind of into more kind of possible managerial roles, or kind of roles in which you're doing things like the HSTT and you further specialize, you'd move up. But there is good progression. Kind of as you move forward, depending on whether you want to specialize specifically in one test or keep it broad. There's lots of different ways you can do that, and always doing things like research and things are always really good as well. I can speak from the experience in my own department. Most hospitals are really open to having students and having you gain that work experience, and I think it's really, really important. If kind of healthcare science is a career you're considering, even if it's not neurophys or whatever it might be, I think the first thing you should do is get some work experience to see whether it's something that you would truly enjoy. And like I said, most hospitals are really happy to take people. There's a link there which is kind of giving you a slight guide to doing it, but you can always just kind of go into your local hospitals and ask around, and I'm sure people will be more than happy to help. But yeah, I think it's really important for whatever it is you decide to do a bit of work experience if you can. And it's really good to put onto your kind of CVs and applications as well, to show that you have been proactive and you have taken that kind of step forward, to really show that there is that interest there. And a bit more kind of where to get more information about neurophys. Like I said, this has just been a very quick kind of snapshot of what we do and things, but there's information, these links, they kind of, the first one talks about someone as their role as a clinical scientist in neurophysiology and kind of what their day-to-day looks like. And then the bottom, the neurophysiology professional organisations, there's some links there. Some of our kind of our organisations telling you a bit more about kind of the career and everything itself. I think that, there we go. And then there's some more about on education as well. So like I said, for the PCP and even degree apprenticeships, I'm confident you can look at those through UCAS. For the degree apprenticeship, I'd also look at the apprenticeship website, which I think is also linked there as well, because those fluctuate a bit more because it depends on who's offering them in what departments. But yeah, these are quite a few good useful links to get started with if you are interested. But yeah, like I said, if you approach any kind of neurophys department, I'm sure they'd be happy to give you a bit more information if it was of interest. That's it for the talk. But if you have any questions, please do ask. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Artie. So yeah, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll relay them to Artie and Jade. And just to echo what Artie said about work experience, you know, if your local hospital does it, great. You might want to contact their training and education team or the department directly. Don't be disheartened if your hospital doesn't do the work experience placement that you like. Just keep asking, keep emailing other departments. I'm sure you'll get somewhere. Just because it depends on like size of departments and things. So if there's no questions so far while you guys are thinking, I will ask one. So Artie, what do you enjoy most about your role in neurophysiology?
I think that's a hard question. I think there's a lot to enjoy. Personally, in the current kind of role I am, where I'm still training, I really enjoy kind of the exposure you can get to kind of the range of different tests we do. So like I said, like no day is quite the same. Like, even though obviously there is a structure of what test you're doing, there's so many different things you can get involved with. Like, I think there's a lot to keep you busy, which I personally really, really enjoy, in the sense where you can dip your toes into lots of different things at the same time. So I quite like that variety. But as well as that, I think personally I quite like interacting with such a range kind of group of patients. So we range from seeing little babies all the way to slightly more elderly patients. So just kind of being able to interact with such kind of a wide group, I find really, really interesting.
What about you, Jade?
Yeah, I think I second what Artie said. Like, it really is a role where you have a lot of variety. So one day you might be testing people's brains, the next day you might be testing people's nerves, and the next day you might be in theatres. So it's really broad ranging. And I think the fact that every day is slightly different keeps the role really interesting. And it's a role that's, I don't know, the field itself, neurophysiology, it's very innovative. So there's always developments happening. So there's lots going on in sort of the AI world with neurophysiology, and looking at EEGs. So I think the fact that it's progressive also keeps it really interesting. And similar to what Artie said, I think it's really nice working with such a broad range of patients. So very similar shared view of what we both enjoy, I would say. But I think that speaks volumes about the profession.
Definitely. And what made you first get into neurophysiology? It's quite a niche field, as you said. What kind of sparked that interest for you? I'll start with you, Jade.
So for me, my background way back was in psychology, and I found that I was particularly interested in neuroscience, so then went down that route. And did quite a bit of studying, so sort of in neurology, and then specialised further into neurophysiology. And the main driver for that was when I was doing neuroscience and neurology, I really wanted to see how I could use that knowledge to actually make a difference to patients. So it felt well and good for me to know it, but I felt like I wanted to do something with it. So then I found the STP course, which is what Artie is doing at the moment, and applied for that role, and yeah, got the position, which I was really happy about. And then yeah, moved to London, did my training, and have continued on from there. So yeah, very I think the route everyone takes into neurophysiology is slightly different. I think mine's probably one of the slightly longer routes. But I'll let Artie tell you about hers. It's maybe a little bit more typical, maybe.
I'd agree with what Jade said. When I was kind of applying for different university courses and looking at what I was interested in, I kind of knew I was interested in healthcare and working with patients, but ignorantly so, I didn't know all of the different roles that were involved. So I'll be quite honest, I had no idea about healthcare science. And kind of I naturally only pictured like, oh, doctors, nurses, maybe physios, and that was kind of the kind of extent of my knowledge. So I did what I was just talking about of work experience, and I just kind of approached different hospitals of just shadowing different professionals. And I came across kind of just physiology in general. And the first thing I actually did was cardiac physiology. But then from that, it led to learning about the different specialisms. So that's how it started. And then I had a natural more interest in kind of the brain and the nervous system. So kind of my A levels tied in quite nicely with that. And then I just happened to find this very lucky course that fit the interests that I had. And I applied for it, and then since then, yeah, it's been going quite well.
So you guys have mentioned kind of the PTP and the STP and the HSST. Sorry, there are a lot of acronyms, and the degree apprenticeship. So I guess just for people that may not know, your usual kind of PTP and STP, you'll probably apply through UCAS, but the degree apprenticeship, you're probably more likely to apply directly with a department, and that's funded by the department. So you'll still come out with a Bachelor's of Science, but you'll be funded for that. So you'll earn while you learn, just for those who may not know that difference, because you go, well, how can there be two routes that give you the same degree? And it's just because one's more placement based and you're in the hospital training and learning, and the other one is you still have placements, but you're not directly based in the hospital as such. So what kind of A levels or subjects do you think might be useful if people are thinking about applying for their A levels and things like that to start them off on their journey?
I think you can do kind of a broad range. I think naturally, I think a science would be very useful. Like if you were doing something like biology, would be a good starting point. Just because I think the natural link it has into what we're doing day to day. Everything we're measuring has kind of a biological reason. Kind of that it's a biological thing we're measuring. Saying that, I think even for neuro, I think something like psychology is quite useful, even just to spark an interest in kind of what you're interested in. I know that when I was applying to UCAS, they wanted you to have at least one science as kind of a requirement for entry. But yeah, I think you can afford to be quite broad. Like even if that was a science, for example, if it was physics you're interested in, I think that relates quite significantly to neurophys, where a lot of our work is kind of looking at electrical signals and measuring it, and kind of when we're looking at our machines and different kind of calibrations we use. So I don't think, for example, if you might love biology, but it's not maybe your strongest subject, I think that's still okay. Kind of at the end of the day, our role is more clinical. So don't be too disheartened. But yeah, from my memory, you do need a science as part of your makeup.
Okay, thank you. If anyone attending does have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the chat, and I will let Artie and Jade know. So I'll just give you a minute or so if you do have any questions. I'm a first year biomed student. Will I need extensive experience to apply for an experience opportunity?
If you mean kind of for work experience, then no, not at all. Kind of any interest, I think, is fine. You don't need to have a specific background or anything to kind of go into that. If you mean more kind of if you were considering to apply for maybe once you've finished your course for the STP and a route like that, then yeah, again, I think any experience is good experience. But yeah, you can apply with any kind of Bachelor of Science degree if it is something you're interested in.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Artie was saying, I think for work experience, as Artie said, no, you don't need any experience, just like a good reason to be looking into going into that particular department. I think that will make them consider you more. But yes, for courses like the STP, for example, you do need some experience, in the sense that will really elevate your application. You don't necessarily need it as a prerequisite. As Artie was saying, if you've got the degree beforehand, then that's something that, of course, that's the prerequisite. Sorry, I just saw the rest of your questions, so I can't do it during my course. Good question. I mean, I guess you can do work experience at any time that suits you, to be honest. If you can do that alongside your course and it's something that you can manage time-wise, then I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to do that during your course. Would you agree, Artie and Kwame?
Yeah, I think because for a lot of departments, just thinking in my field, it's trying to organise when you can have the people for the work experience. So
yeah,
if I was you, I would just email and contact as many departments as I can if I wanted to do a work experience. You can have a look on like the different hospital trusts websites to see which hospitals have neurophysiology departments, and then ask if they are willing to take any work experience. Like I mentioned before, sometimes you can go to the department directly. Sometimes certain hospital trusts have training and education leads that you need to go through, or you can ask them and then they'll put in that word with you with the department. So I think those kind of work experience opportunities you can do whenever works for you and that department, and you would be working together to find a date that works anyway. And like they both said, any experience is good experience. So whether you get an experience directly with a hospital, or you look at experience in the charity sector in terms of working with people, it's showing that you've got those interpersonal skills, that you can work with people and get the best out of them. But definitely getting experience in hospital is a great thing to do if you can do it. So I would definitely advise messaging the departments directly. That link that Artie had up before kind of goes through what they're expecting to know from you if you're looking for work experience there, and it kind of gives you a little bit of guidance there if you've never asked or tried to get for work experience before. But I'll leave it to Artie now.
I agree with what you both have said. I would only thing I'd add is just by saying, I think getting in early is a good thing. If it is, like, often there is quite a few people interested in different kind of work experience for whatever it might be. So whenever you have time to kind of approach these different departments and offer the dates you can do, I think the earlier you approach it, the better it is to kind of guarantee you'll definitely get that experience in.
Would they prioritise graduates for work experience? Not necessarily. Work experience is something that we do encourage in most disciplines, because we want to get people into our specialisms. We'd love everybody to come and join us if we could. So work experience can be from many, many levels. So it could be from, people in sixth form who are wanting to understand a little bit more about different specialisms before they apply for their university courses. It could be people in their undergraduate course trying to understand a little bit more about if that course is the right thing for them or what they might want to look at, or even people who have graduated previously and are looking for a change in career. So it's not specific for graduates. It's just about asking. And oftentimes in a lot of things, if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you're willing to put yourself out there and ask, then most of the time you may get something. Obviously, because departments are busy, you might not get it in on your first try, but keep trying. My colleague, had to send out, tens of different applications and queries for work experience before she got one. But that's just, if you keep trying, you will get something. Do you agree, Artie and Jade?
Yeah, everything you said, I agree completely.
I also agree.
Yeah, so if that is something that you're interested, definitely give it a go, which it sounds like you are. So just have a look with your local hospital, see if they do it, or if that's a small hospital, maybe go to your next bigger hospital trust, which is probably more likely to have the department, and try that way. I think what people want to see is that you're wanting to go there, that you're excited to go and see them, and by reaching out to them, they'll be able to work that out. Lovely. I'll just give it a little bit longer just in case you have another follow-up question. Thanks. No worries. Well, thank you all so much. Like I said, you'll be able to see the YouTube link later on. Thank you so much, Artie and Jade, for letting us explore a little bit about neurophysiology with you this afternoon, and hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Thanks.
Thanks, Kylie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Artie. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.